Hello, YouTube community. My name's the Jack-Impa13. Today, we're going to be doing a Mike-ochondriac podcast. I'm going to let you guys know that for the first, I'll say about 10 minutes of this, we're going to talk about things that are pretty simple, to the point, and easy to get through. They're going to be things talking about why I've been gone, not going too far in depth, what I want to do with the channel and why I haven't quite done that yet, and more or less my hopes for my creative expression. That's going to be for about the first 10 minutes of this. I've recorded 15 minutes one time and about 5 minutes another time trying to explain this, but I think trying to compartmentalize it all is going to be easier. However, after that 10 minutes, we're going to be getting into topics that are a bit darker and a bit more thought intensive. I'll let you guys know when I get to that stage and when I want to start talking about that. But for those of you who are unable to deal with that, with the way that the world currently is, I can understand that. I suggest leaving then. But for those of you who want to stick with me, want to listen to what I have to say, and are able to handle me going into very difficult topics that are not pleasant to talk about or listen to, thank you. I really appreciate that. But until then, let's keep it light. Let's keep it simple. Let's get into it. So as you guys know, I haven't really recorded much, or recorded and uploaded, is a better way of putting it, much, since about 2018. In 2018, I had a fairly decent start with uploading. I had uploaded a decent amount of Persona, Longest Journey, and began If My Heart Had Wings, if I recall correctly. It's been a while since I've checked my channel's analytics and saw that kind of stuff, but I'm fairly certain that throughout the month of January, I was trying to do a consistent upload schedule. However, after that, everything sort of stopped, and I was gone until about August of 2019. Occasional uploads here and there, but it wasn't until August of 2019 that I had first day of the rest of my life. Now you're probably wondering, what happened there? And part of it is really deep, depressing, dark stuff. But the other part of it is simple lack of motivation to edit. The recording was always the easy part, but it was the editing that was the issue. And one of my main criticisms with my current work that I've done this far is that it's too simple. And I don't mean that to downplay it, because it's not easy to get in front of a microphone, speak your mind while playing a video game, and then upload that. That's not a simple process. I'm not saying this because it's difficult. Like, it's a very simple, you turn on... I know I'm being very contradictory with this. Let me explain still. You just sort of turn on whatever recording device you have, talk into the microphone, play the game, and then end it. That's a very simple concept, but in actuality, think about what it takes to do that kind of thing. You have to first have the drive and the motivation to play a video game and talk while playing it. You then have to have the concentration to play that video game, talk, and be entertaining. And then, and this is the most important thing, because the other two things are rather pieces of cake once you get down to it. But then you have to have the, I guess the term is courage, though I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. But you have to have the sort of drive to then upload that to the internet where you know it's going to be seen by people. And for people like me who has very high levels of anxiety sometimes and who have very negative mindsets on occasions, that's a lot of work. And I know that in actuality, the stuff that I have to do is nothing. But when I get to the editing process, which is not something I really enjoy anyway, it's not a walk in the park, I get to a stage throughout it where I'm just like, is this worth my time? Am I really enjoying what I'm doing here? And oftentimes, the answer is yes, and I'll upload stuff. But there are some times when the answer is no, and I go for very long periods of time not editing stuff. I had If My Heart Had Wings for example, for about a year and a half. I think I did it sometime in June of 2018, and then I lost it sometime in like, I want to say September of 2019. So that's actually probably closer to a year and a quarter. Whatever the case, though, I had it for a while and I just never edited it and then uploaded it, for that matter. So in actuality, it's not so much that it's a difficult task to do, it's that I just haven't had driver motivation or desire to do the things that I've wanted to do. But that's only part of it, obviously. I'll get to the other part later. But something that I've wanted to do while thinking about all of this and while trying to get into this is make my episodes of things a bit more fun and a bit less formulaic. Everybody knows the typical Let's Play style. You put a game in, you talk, you play, you edit it, you upload it, done. There's not a whole lot else to do there. Occasionally you'll see people who throw in some quick edits, sound effects and stuff like that through the editing process, but none of it's really inventive, I guess. And I understand that in actuality there's not a whole lot of ways to be inventive with mediums. You know, eventually you get to the point where everything's sort of been done. But what I want to do at the very least is add a little bit more flair to my videos. So for example, when I was doing the that was a pen, by the way, if you did hear that. I tried to get it off the camera, but I might as well just mention it. When I was trying to do creative stuff for Persona, that's when I came up with the I'm Spartacus thing. That's when I did my sister and I eating lunch in the middle of an episode for the lunch break. You know, stuff of that nature I did. And was kind of what I wanted to continue doing. That kind of stuff is not super difficult, but it is a bit more than just playing the game and continuing on with my life. And I wanted to do more stuff like that, and I wanted to be even more creative than just that. I have a bunch of series that I want to do that are purely storytelling based things, where the video game is basically a background for the story being told. But I also wanted to just do silly little things within the game itself. For example, with The Longest Journey, I had a splitting off section where there was sort of two paths that I could take, and I was like, well, what happened if I did the other one? And I did this sort of branching paths for a little while, same section of the game, but different things happening in the episodes. So it was like 15.1, 15.2, or whatever. And while that wasn't particularly well done, the idea was there. And I wanted to expand upon that. And for the future, I'm hoping to be able to do more creative things like that, to add more flair to the games, to give an experience that's not simply playing a game all the way through. Now, I'm not saying that that's against what I want to do. For example, if my heart had wings, majority of what I want to do with that game is just read the visual novel, experience it with you guys, occasionally make snide comments, and get on with my life. That's what that game was designed to do for me. And occasionally when I play Persona or The Longest Journey, that's all I really want to do anyway, is I just want to experience the game for the first time and experience that with you guys. But occasionally my mind will be like, hey, let's do this really cool, fun thing. And I want to get to the stage where instead of looking at that and being like, well, what if nobody likes it? What if nobody watches it? What if people look at it and they are like, oh, this was done terribly, you're absolute trash? Instead of having that mindset and being so focused on the negative, I want to get to the point where I'm able to do things creatively and not be afraid. That's one of my main hopes. And another difficulty that goes with that is that I'm just a very lazy person oftentimes. it's not something that I'm proud of, but it's the truth. When I want to do something, it has to be an extreme desire. Because otherwise I'm just going to look at it and be like, is this really worth my time? And oftentimes, if it's not something that I will see a direct, noticeable reaction from, then it's not. And I want to get past that. I have a lot of really bad coping mechanisms with these issues as well. The negative thoughts and the constant blaming myself for things that go wrong and the laziness are probably my two weakest attributes, if I have to give any sort of diagnosis or breakdown of who I am. Because in actuality, if I were to do the things that I wanted to do, and if I were to at least try, sure, there'd be hits and misses here and there, but I feel like the hits would be really good, and the misses would definitely suck, but they would be outweighed by the amount of cool stuff that could happen. And hell, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I am just an absolute trash storyteller. I've been told otherwise, though. So I would like to at least take that advice and turn it into something that is a bit more substantive. You can be told forever that you're smart, intelligent, or really creative, or a good writer, or good at drawing, or any of those things. But if you don't apply that skill, what's the good in being good at it? You know what I mean? So I'd like to eventually find ways to overcome the laziness, find ways to overcome the desire to do things that are creative, but then not doing them. Not overcoming the desire, but then not doing them section, I should say. And I guess that's sort of what I'm working on now. I think that's the main issue currently. However, there are reasons for why I have this laziness, and there are reasons for why I don't have the motivation. And the laziness is a bit more innate. It's a very explainable, simple process. But the depression and the sadness is not. And that's where we're going to get into the more heavy topic of this Mike-ochondriac podcast, and really the thing that I wanted to get into in general with this. I wanted to sort of start off a little bit softer so that I could get myself in a groove, get myself talking, and at least compile a lot of the thoughts that I wanted to have said, because now it's going to get to a point where my mindset sometimes drifts away and I go on tangents. However, because we're dealing with a lot of difficult topics, if you would like to leave now, I completely understand. Thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you later, kind of thing. For those of you still here, we're going to be talking about depression, mental health, and suicide. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in the last Mike-ochondriac podcast was my mental health, my depression, and the negative and frankly aggressive thoughts that I had in some of my darkest moments. When rewatching that with Jordan, I realized that it was very uncomfortable at points to watch for me, and not particularly, I guess the best way of putting it is entertaining. But what I want to do with this channel is, instead of focusing solely on my positive, happy moments, I want to show you all of the sides of me. The good, the bad, the ugly. And sadly, I guess that was the ugly that you saw there. And we're going to continue doing that for the foreseeable future, because I want you to know who I am. I want this to be, instead of it being me being a content creator and you being a content viewer, it being two people who are more or less friends, I guess is the best way to put it. And I'm coming to you for a place to vent, a place to talk. I recognize that the difficulty with this is, if there ever comes a point in time when I have more than 250 people watching at a consistent period of time, 250 being the number of people that the average human is able to have in their general vicinity, friend group basis kind of thing, that once it gets to that point, it'll be difficult to continue to have that kind of interaction with the viewers. And while I do hope to eventually get to that stage, because that would be amazing to see more than triple digits on videos, I do realize that for now, my viewer base is small. And while it's small, I want you guys to know me. I want you guys to be able to understand who I am, why I do the things that I do, and honestly, go through life with me. You know, maybe this isn't the best way of running a YouTube channel. Maybe it's not kosher in a lot of circles, but this is kind of how I want to do things. It's kind of who I want to be. And there are going to be things that I don't talk about here. Political views, religious views, views on money, that kind of stuff. You know, the big no-nos that get people arguing. But what I'm talking about now is not stuff that gets people arguing. It gets people feeling uncomfortable, but not because they have a disagreement with the position, but because it's not really fun to talk about. So why was I gone for so long? Yes, there was the laziness. Yes, there was the desire to do more creative stuff and then not being able to motivate myself. But there was also mental health things. Not just for me, though. And that's where the suicide comes in. And that's where I want to sort of step on a soapbox, if I may. In August of 2019, I was beginning the First Day of the Rest of My Life series. I had recorded an episode and uploaded it, and then I had recorded more footage for the next episode of the series, and I had planned on making the series a weekly basis type of deal. But then something happened that prevented me from doing that. I had a friend who I began talking with, and they were a very depressed person, and they were just sort of trying to find somebody to listen to them. And I did my best. I'm only human, I can only do so much, but I did my best to make sure that they felt heard and that they realized that I cared about them as a human being, that they had meaning and value in this world. However, by the time they got to me, it seemed they were more just trying to get to somebody that they kind of knew would care about them, to let them know, hey, life's not great and I don't see a way out. And I just want you to know this. And I'm not entirely certain how else to put it. Eventually, I found out that this person committed suicide. This was in the ending portion of August, I believe August 20th. I was one of the last people to talk with this person. They had mentioned something about a disastrous relationship that they wish had gone better. And in that, there was a lot of abuse and a lot of blame being laid onto this person. And it sucked hearing that, because I was hoping that they would eventually find a way to deal with it. I saw this message before knowing anything was wrong, and I responded to it basically saying, hey, I know the situation fucking sucks, but hey, you can get through it, you know, more or less. Obviously, I don't want to go into the depth of the conversation that I wanted to have with him because it's personal, but it was along the lines of, hey, I think you're a good person. I'm sorry this is happening to you. What can I do to help? Kind of thing. I then found out the next day that I was one of the last people that he had mentioned things to, last person he had ever said anything to before he decided to commit. And for probably 2 or 3 months, I had survivor's guilt out the ass for that. I was like, I was the last person he talked to. I didn't really know him that well. why was he saying things to me? Why was I the person he decided to confide all of these really dark and sad feelings? Could I have done more? If I had answered his message before things had gone wrong, could I have stopped anything? Questions like that kept running through my head. And for a while, I was really fucked up. To be honest, I still think about this guy pretty much every day, and I only really knew him from those 2 or 3 days that I talked with him. And this happened around the point when I wanted to upload the episode for First Day of the Rest of My Life. But because of how fucked up I was, because of how bad my mental state was after seeing the mortality and how fragile human beings can be when something goes wrong, and thinking to myself, well, this guy had a lot of similar problems to me. This could be me if I ever got to a stage where I felt more hopeless again. Because of all of these types of thoughts going through my head, I just didn't have the ability to. And for, as I said, about 2 or 3 months, I debated ever editing and uploading the stuff that I had. I decided against it because what I had prior to that was a bunch of happy stuff. Me going to Busch Gardens, me going to drive my grandparents down to Virginia Bay Bridge Tunnel so that they could go do stuff with their family in South Carolina. Things like that that were fun adventures. But I wasn't feeling that. And if I'm not feeling that way, and if I'm not feeling that mood, I don't force myself to present that. You know what I mean? Now, after all of this, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to upload that stuff, but maybe I can add that in comparison to the other sad stuff that I had going on. I could talk about it, and I could go through things that had really been bothering me. Things with this friend of mine who had just committed suicide. The fact that I had lost an aunt and an uncle not long after that, from both sides of the family. Aunt on my father's side, who helped raise me, and an uncle on my mother's side, more so my adoptive grandfather's side, who had been one of my favorite brothers of his, one of the more interesting ones that I enjoyed doing stuff and talking with when I went to family meetings and stuff. So I lost 3 people that had some profound impact on me in a very short period of time, as in the losses had a profound impact on me. Not necessarily that the people themselves did. As I said, I only know the guy for 2 or 3 days. There's not much that could be made of a friendship that short, I guess. Which is a shame, because he was a really cool dude, and I really wish that I could have done more stuff with him. It upsets me a lot that I didn't get to know him prior to that, because it wasn't like I just joined this one server, he talked with me for the 2 or 3 days, and that was it. Like, I was part of the server that he was in. We had momentary interactions of 2 or 3 messages every now and again. I could have begun a conversation with him long before then, maybe even done more stuff to help out. I'm not saying that it's my fault that he did what he did. There's so many other extenuating circumstances, and I can't blame myself for all of those types of things. But what I am saying is, it fucked me up, I guess is the easiest way of putting it. I'm having difficulty putting words together because this is bringing back a lot of bad thoughts, but I want to get them out to you. I want you guys to know what's going on and how I felt and still feel sometimes, because that's just how I want to interact with you, you know? But yeah, so I decided to record a few things, and I basically had a segment that I was going to add to the First Day of the Rest of My Life, talking about and addressing suicide. I went to my father's grave and began this sort of emotional tirade about how much I despise the fact that people aren't given enough help, how much I wish people had better means of being able to deal with mental health, and how I want to be there for as many people as I possibly can who are having issues with mental health, because I've gone through it. I've seen it. I've been in the same position as a lot of people for different reasons, and I'm not going to ever try and compare my pain with everybody else's pain, because that's just not fair to anybody. But in doing that, I felt like I revealed too much. I'm not entirely certain where the boundary line is for this kind of stuff. And when I talked with my therapist about this, because yes, I go to therapy for my issues. Thank you for questioning that. I'm joking, but seriously, like, I do go to therapy for that kind of stuff. When I was talking with her, she was sort of like, well, is this the best thing to do? This is going up on the internet. People are going to see this. If you ever want to get into a position later on in life, this could come back to haunt you. And my opinion of this now is, if somebody sees my videos, sees me swearing, or sees me talking about mental health, or sees me discussing aggressive behaviors that I had that I didn't want to have and were sort of involuntary, or sees me talking about suicide and they decide not to hire me, I didn't want to work for that person anyway, because that person can't handle the harsh realities of life, and I hate that. Now, I'm not saying that people who can't handle that kind of stuff are bad people. I'm saying that if they are going to judge me based solely on how I interact with that, then I don't want them to be the person who is employing me. You know what I mean? Maybe that's a bad position, but that's just sort of how it feels now. So anyway, to get back to how that prevented me from making YouTube videos, it's obvious, some of the things, but I had all of these different segments talking about suicide and mental health, talking about things that I had done in the past that made me feel really odd and not quite able to express those types of things. I wanted to add those onto the happy-go-lucky, fun times, Busch Gardens-y experiences. And I just never was able to justify to myself that that was the best way to go. And for months, that just sort of sat on my computer untouched. Eventually, the computer started acting up. I have no clue what the fuck happened to it, but the hard drive basically was corrupted, and I lost all of that footage anyway. So now we have to just sort of move on with our lives, regardless of what I wanted to do with it. But yeah, so like, until now, I've been sort of trying to deal with all this stuff internally, try to find ways to explain it to you guys, and be okay with the fact that I was explaining it to you. Be okay with the fact that what I'm saying might not be easy to talk about, easy to listen to, but it is important for communication and for you guys to know who I am and for you guys to be able to experience what I would like for you guys to experience on this channel. And that's basically all the facets of life, you know, being happy, being sad, having a lot of frustration, having a lot of anger, being embarrassed, all of those types of things. That's what life is about. And to me, it's more interesting to watch people that are willing to express those types of things than the people who are willing to put on facades for everything that they upload and make it seem like what they're showing to you is reality, but in actuality what they're showing to you is a persona that they have put on. It's one of the reasons why I really like the game Persona, because it talks about the idea of wearing masks to convince people of other things. And I think that that's sort of the mindset that I've been in recently, is I don't want that to be me. I don't want to put on a mask. I don't want to put on a happy face. I don't want to sing a happy song whenever I'm depressed, because I want to be able to feel sadness. I want to be able to feel happiness. I want to be able to feel anger. I want to feel joy. I want to feel elatement. I want to feel, I know a lot of these words are synonyms, but you know what I mean? Like, I want to feel all the emotions that are in the human spectrum of emotion. And I want to be able to demonstrate those things and be able to experience those things with you guys. Because in the end, I want this to be a place where I feel comfortable, where I can be me, and not just the best me, but every facet of me. You know what I mean? So I guess it's been a struggle trying to deal with all that. Now, I wanted to talk about suicide and mental health today because to me it is probably my second or third most important, I guess, opinion. First is how I think that education should be run. I'm not going to get into politics. That's its own story. Secondly is how I feel people should interact with each other, which is more or less, hey, treat everybody like you're, sorry. Explaining it is sort of difficult without getting into politics, so I'm trying to word it in a way that's less political and less divisive. I guess the easiest way is the golden rule. Treat others how you wish to be treated, and accept people for who they are and not who you want them to be. Stuff of that nature, I guess, is the easiest way of putting it. But the third most important thing is mental health and being able to discuss your problems with people, being able to, when other people discuss problems with you, help them out to the best of your ability. And eventually what I would like to see is a world in which people that have mental health issues are not demonized and treated as others, but are helped for the issues that they have and are given enough love, comfort, and attention that they can overcome the problems that they have. I know that that's not going to always end up working out. Sadly, there are always going to be people that fall through the cracks. There's always going to be people who, no matter how much you help them, are unable to be helped further. I get that. But I want to let you know that if there's anybody out there watching this video who has problems, I get you. I get where you're coming from. I've had issues myself. But please, 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 for the love of God, don't act on those issues and don't make the permanent life-ending decision to deal with the problems that you have. I understand that there's a lot of cliches about don't make a permanent decision for temporary problems, but it's not always temporary problems. There are people out there who have very, very chronic issues. People who are currently being abused, who have been abused their entire lives. People who have situations in which they are unable to escape from them no matter how hard they try or wish to. And for those people, I feel for you. There's nothing I can personally do right now to stop it. And that sucks because I wish I could reach out to everybody out there, give them a big hug, take them away from the situation and put them in a better situation. Sadly, you can't do that with everybody. It's impossible. I wish that I could, but it's not feasible. But regardless of what I can or cannot do, what I can do right now is share my story. Share the sadness and depression and anxiety and issues that I've gone through, how I wish to cope with them, how coping mechanisms have worked for me, and hopefully that can assist people out there who are going through trauma and who are going through difficult times themselves to be able to enjoy this beautiful thing that we have of life in the most horrible of circumstances. Now, sadly, I understand that when giving this type of advice, there's some people out there who, if they were to try and take it, it could end up hurting them more. And for those people out there, I'm so sorry. I know that situations are fucking rough out there for some people. I get that. But I want to help as many people in the best way that I possibly can. And this is the best way that I can figure out how to do it. I'm sorry if it's not enough, but I'm trying, I guess. And I guess the best thing to explain now is that this is probably something that I'm going to continue doing in the future. I'm not going to have every episode or every video be about mental health and be about helping people through tough times. I hope that my videos do that, certainly, but I'm not going to focus that as what the channel is about. But I'm going to bring it up from time to time. I'm going to bring it up when I am experiencing things and when I feel like talking about it makes sense. Because the month of September is Mental Health Awareness Month, and because of all of the things that happen with my friend in August, every September I'm going to try and do my best to create videos discussing this topic and trying to get awareness out there for people who are unable to. But anyway, let's get off the soapbox now and let's talk about what I've gone through, my issues, my problems, so that you can understand where I'm coming from when I do address these things in the future, and more importantly, so that you can understand who I am and what I've been through, so that when I try to give you some advice, you understand that I'm coming from a position where I've been through a lot of very bad shit before too. Again, not going to compare it to anybody out there, but sure, the things that I've been through, it fucking sucked. So let's begin from the very beginning and probably answering a question that you might have had. Why was my father in a grave? Now, this is probably what set me on the path of wanting to learn about mental health and set me on the path of wanting to assist people who have issues with this. Not only did I have these problems myself and have had them probably since about the age of 13, but my father and my mother and my grandparents, not all of them, but a couple of them, had these problems. And so most of my life has been around situations of people who have gone through trauma, people who have experienced very sad emotions, and not all of them have taken the best courses of action. My father turned to drugs, turned to alcohol, and in the end turned to suicide as his means of escaping the harsh realities that he faced in his life. My father was a brilliant man in many ways, and a lot of what he went through in his life fucked him up. When he was about 2 years old, his father, who was an electrician, ended up dying from electrocution while he was working on power lines. That's the story I've been told, at least. I have no idea. I haven't really checked to confirm, but that's the story that I'm going to convey today because that's the story that I know, I guess. I'll explain in a little while why I have such hesitancy to deal with absolutes when talking about these things. So my father had to deal with basically being fatherless himself for a decent portion of his formative years. Eventually, my grandmother remarried, and the person that she married was really into the military, really into guns, and my father absolutely loved it. He was a very good adoptive father. He did a very good job of being the stepfather that he needed to be as far as everything that I've been told. And my dad absolutely adored him. Because of my dad's interest in the military, thanks to him, he decided he wanted to go to West Point. And he was never the brightest student. He was a very smart person, but was not very good in school. But he was also a very good athlete. He played lacrosse, was one of the better players on the team. He played soccer, was also a fairly decent player from what I've been told. And overall, his focuses were more on the athletic portion of things and less on the school. Now, I'm not saying he was dumb, and I'm not saying that he goofed off in classes. But that wasn't where his strengths lie, I guess. My grandmother and his mother basically had to assist him in a lot of ways in that. section, because she was very smart. She still is very smart. She's a teacher, for Christ's sake, teacher of English, and she more or less helped him get the grades required to get into West Point, and helped motivate him to do well on the SAT, helped motivate him to do well in classes, helped him out where needed and where acceptable with his classes so that he could pass and do well. However, that also led to a decent amount of dependence, let's say. I don't want to speak ill of my grandmother because she's an amazing person, and I hope that this doesn't come across as doing so. But her means of assisting my father, from what I've been able to determine at least, probably had some negative impact on the way that my father was able to then approach the world. When he got to West Point, he had a lot of difficulties fitting in. He had a lot of difficulties sticking with the regiments and the harsh difficulties. He went through a few initiation processes that really fucked him up. And while this was all going on, my grandmother and her husband were having fights. Eventually they got divorced, and when he came back, sadly, from West Point, having failed and not been able to achieve one of his main life goals, he found out that they had split. So not only had he lost out on one of the opportunities that he'd been working for the majority of his life towards, he also lost his father and had to deal with a divorce. All this happening around the age of 18, 19 years old. And having been assisted so much when he was younger, having been put in a position where everything that he had basically known has now fallen apart, he didn't have the best means of being able to cope and deal with these kinds of issues. He eventually turned to drugs and to alcohol. Somewhere within the period of all of this, however, he ended up meeting my mother. And while my mother and he were very, very much in love, they also had a lot of arguments. And so, for the earlier portions of their marriage, it'd be a lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Not just their marriage, but also their relationship. Eventually, they had me, and this sort of inspired my mother to at least try to regulate her life. She also was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and she tried her best to overcome those addictions. She's told me in the past that she had. I don't quite know. Eventually, my grandparents were brought into the situation. My mother's parents, because she needed legal counsel, I guess, in a custody battle that my paternal grandmother, sorry, it took me a little while to piece together the words I was trying to put, that my paternal grandmother began. My mother and father sort of separated. They hadn't gotten a divorce quite yet, but they were on the process of it. And my father wanted me. He wanted custody of me. Throughout the court process, it was basically revealed that neither my mother or my father were fit for parenting just yet, so there was temporary custody given to my grandparents. They were the ones represented in court, so they were the ones who were given custody. And for a little while, this worked. My grandparents raised me for a little bit there, and my mom and dad were able to sort out their differences, and eventually got to the stage where they're like, okay, well, we think that we've done pretty decent. Let's try and get Michael back. But throughout the entire process, my dad was smoking weed, he was drinking alcohol, he was taking LSD, he was doing all sorts of different drugs that basically kept him inebriated and in a fucked up state of mind. Now, while I personally have no difficulties with people drinking and doing drugs for leisure, the way that he did it ended up affecting me and affecting other people negatively. So, for example, one of the stories that I have been told, and probably one of the reasons why I have such difficulties breathing sometimes, aside from asthma, that I got from my parents smoking, and other factors. But one of the things that happened was my father had me for the weekend, and my mother came to pick me up. When she got to the house, she saw me sort of lying in a pool of various bodily fluids, mainly really, really green snot. But I also had a diaper that was unchanged and things of that nature. My father was passed out upstairs. Something had happened. I don't remember what. It's been a while since she's told me this story. But because of his lifestyle choices, it gave me pneumonia. And that pneumonia possibly could have killed me had my mother not found me soon enough. Eventually, however, my father started getting a little bit back on the mend, not being in as nearly bad of a position, but he was never really in a great mindset. He always had issues. Not just with the alcohol and drugs, but having dealt with all of the crazy shit in his life, his father dying, the divorce, failing one of his major life goals, constantly being poor, all that kind of stuff piled up and really fucked with his mental psyche and put him in a very depressed mindset. Eventually, when he and my mother tried to get me back, the courts told them, listen, you guys haven't done the required things we told you to do. You're being belligerent. It's clear to us that you are not going to be fit parents. The grandparents have now been awarded full custody. You guys will get to see him on weekends and on some holiday visitations. After a decent amount of time passed, probably about a year, my father came to the realization that he had lost basically everything that he wanted. He lost his son. He lost the dream that he had of becoming somebody really big, important when he went to West Point, in the military, I guess, to clarify that. And he and my mother had constantly been fighting throughout the majority of their relationship. He lost his father. There's the divorce where he lost his adoptive father. So many things that happened to him in his life, and the drugs and alcohol didn't really help. He became very paranoid and very scared somebody was after him, my mother told me. There was so many problems going on with him that eventually one night he went to his storage where he kept his gun and he committed suicide, pulled the trigger. I was about 3. This happened in 2001. In fact, it happened in April of 2001. The memorial or anniversary, if that's what you prefer, either term is fine, happened recently. And it's part of the reason why I sort of want to get this stuff off my chest, is that I've been thinking about it a lot lately. But I was about 3 when this happened. I didn't really know him very well. I only know him from things that I was told about him. But that's sort of the story of how my father committed suicide, how my father went through all of his things, and I guess how all of the shit that started weighing on my mind began. For the first few years after he committed suicide, my mother was in a very terrible state. There was a lot of issues going on with her. She eventually ended up going to AA and met her biological father and began getting her life back on track. She met my stepfather, and things were pretty decent for a little while for her there. Her stepfather, not her stepfather, her husband, who was my stepfather, I probably screwed up somewhere along the lines there too, but she met my stepfather, is what I was trying to say. The two of them, while they argued a decent amount, were very clearly in love and very clearly liked each other a lot. And the fact that he was also very good to me really helped. There's a joke in the family that even though he liked my mother, he married her because of me. I don't know how true that is. I like to think so, because that gives me a lot of hope that I'm actually a decent person and that people do like me. But I also do think that it's more of a silly little joke that the family uses, I guess. And for a while, things were pretty decent. However, I never really knew where my actual father was. When it happened, I had basically been told that he was gone, and I sort of knew in some way that had happened, but I didn't know how or why, and I just sort of moved on with life. But I began questioning it a little bit when I was younger, and instead of telling me the truth, because how do you tell a 5-year-old that their father committed suicide? How do you explain those types of processes? You instead go with something that's a bit easier for the kid to digest, and that was a car accident. That's something a child can understand, something they've seen on TV at least a few times. They know that it can be deadly, and it's not something that gives them a negative opinion of their parent. So for a while, I figured he just died in a car accident, and that's the story that I told my friends. As time went on, I realized that there was something wrong about that, because I remembered something different. So I thought, okay, well, he had gone to get milk from the store and was shot and killed by somebody that was in a robbery. I don't remember where all of this came from. Somebody down the line told me about the suicide, and I didn't quite know how to process it, I guess. Something like that happened. And I used that as the story that I told people. Then people realized, well, wait a second. You said something the other time that was completely different from this. What gives? You're changing your story up. And that lack of a cohesive story really fucked with me and really set me off a bad path. In addition to this, I was always a kid who wanted attention but never really got it, and the way that I found able to get it was when I cried. So I started crying more often. But I also had a lot of, I guess, underlying issues from my father's suicide, from my father's death, that I never really addressed, and I never knew how to cope with or deal with. Still don't really, to be quite honest. So I cried a lot. People teased me and bullied me for crying a lot. Got to the point where even teachers did that. I'd had conflicting stories on how my father died, so people basically didn't trust me when it came to that kind of stuff. They didn't know how to appreciate it or understand what had happened. And to be quite fair, I don't blame them. So there's a lot of isolation that came from this. I eventually turned to means of physical humor, not farts and burps kind of stuff, but hurting myself for laughs. And this was how I ended up finding inroads in communities. This is how I became part of friend groups. Now, I had friends who didn't look at me through that lens, particularly ones who had also been through shit. But because the school was so small that I went to a private school, only having one or two friends typically meant you were an outcast. And I didn't want to be an outcast. I wanted people to like me. So I turned to being in the class clown, getting myself in trouble all the time, doing something called Mr. Drop, where it basically took the last bit of a Kool-Aid jammer that I had for lunch, pretended that I was talking to it, and then it would hit me in the eye. It was a funny thing. A lot of people really liked it. It was something that everybody knew by the end of probably first or second grade, and was requested on numerous occasions when I had Kool-Aid jammers, all the way up until 8th grade when I left the school. But because I had so many other underlying things going on that made me feel outcast, made me feel like I was an isolated person, I sort of became isolating and sort of became a solitary person. I'd play with video games by myself. I'd play with my wrestlers instead of going out and trying to meet new friends. Instead of playing outside an awful lot, I would read books, things of that nature. Now, I did have friends, don't get me wrong. I wasn't a complete hermit, or I wasn't completely alone, but I wasn't as liked as I wanted to be, because I wanted to, for whatever reason, have people think of me as an amazing person. I don't know what caused it. I guess it's because I watched a bunch of videos and movies of people that were very courageous and outgoing, and I wanted to be like that. I couldn't really tell you. Years go by, a decent amount of bullying comes later from me crying, and I get to the stage in about 6th or 7th grade where I just decide, fuck it, people are going to bully me for crying, I need to stop crying. It happened over the course of a few days and a few different situations, but the main one that comes to mind was I was in the middle of a baseball game. I was playing out in center field. I was typically a very good center fielder, but I had occasions when I would drop the ball, and I think it's because my hand-eye coordination, while it was very decent, would often be affected by my depth perception, which was not as decent. So I would lose the ball sometimes. It would bounce off my glove because I didn't close it in time, things of that nature. And in one instance, this happened. And so I'm sitting out in center field. I just fucked up an amazing catch that would have helped us out a lot, and the inning continued. And I began to start crying, but then I thought to myself, no, we're not going to cry. We're not going to let this bother us. We're going to move on. And at the time, I thought that was a good thing. I thought that that was a positive development, that I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to, be upset about something this minor. But I think what had happened was subconsciously, through that and a few other actions where I did the same thing, I taught myself not to cry. And since then, I very rarely am able to express the emotion of sadness in that manner. And having that happen at such a young age and continuing on until now caused a lot of deep traumas. Whenever I needed to express that I was feeling sad, instead of being able to cry, it became anger, or it became, more often, apathy. About a year after that happened was my 13th birthday, and I went to my mom's, and she basically told me my entire life story to that point, and how my father did all the things that he did, how my mother did all the things that she did when she was younger, which I'm not going to get into. But through doing this, I ended up developing a completely different opinion of my mother, a completely different opinion from my father, and more importantly, a completely different opinion from the people who had raised me, my grandparents. Because she told me stories about them and things that had happened with her that I had never been told before. I had never heard before. And there was a lot of animosity there. She mentioned a lot of things that caused her to dislike them, hate them in some instances, and different problems that happened throughout the earlier portions of my life that I never got to see because of how young I was. This then led to a couple of incidents where she had arguments with my grandfather, and I had to deal with, for the first time in my entire knowing existence at least, the familial fights. And because of how much I love my mother, how much I love my grandparents, seeing them go head to head like that was not great. I didn't want to see people that I cared deeply about fighting each other, bringing up old wounds and stabbing each other in the back. And what ended up happening from this conversation was a feeling of just being a pawn in this game between my mother and, more particularly, my grandfather. She kept mentioning it as if he was doing things to get back at her, as if he was doing things to, not for my benefit, but to show her that she fucked up, that she failed, that he won, things of that nature. And as time went on, my grandparents said pretty much the same type of thing about my mother, and I kind of ended up agreeing that with both of them I sort of felt like a pawn. This then put everything in a completely different light. The people that I thought cared about me and loved me and wanted me to succeed became people that were using me for their own benefit. And my worth in life became down to how well I could get back at the other person by doing something with the other one. I never did anything to continue to propagate that, not knowingly at least. But having that thought process in my mind basically took all of the love and affection that I had gotten over the years and tore it away from me. This really screwed with me to the point where anytime somebody showed me a sense of compassion or gratitude, I tended to either develop very strong emotional, sometimes romantic feelings towards them, or cause me to not believe them and not trust them. Oftentimes both. As time went on, this method of dealing with people led to many issues. I'd fall in love with people who didn't like me back. I'd fall in love with people who liked me but didn't quite know how much, and by the time they realized it, they realized they didn't want to be in a relationship with me, but I had already fallen head over heels for them. And this continued to happen about, I want to say 8 times from the age of 13 until 2019. Since then, I haven't fallen in love with anybody new recently, which is really good, I guess. I'm not entirely certain. 2018, rather. Sorry. Which I guess is a good thing, that I haven't had any weird obsessive relationships or feelings of, hey, I'm in love with this person, but I don't think that they'd like me back, and then having that been proven right and stuff like that. And I'm not blaming most of the people that this happened with. In fact, I'm not blaming any of them for that happening. Like, love is a difficult subject. So you can't fall in love with somebody at the drop of a hat. It's not how it works. There has to be some sort of connection there. And if they don't have it, they don't have it. You know, that's just the way it goes. I happen to develop feelings very quickly, and it becomes very obsessive over time because that's just how I think. I think about people and I think about things constantly, and I go through them a lot in my head. It's one of the things that I take medication for. It's one of the things that I go to therapy for. So, but I had dealt with, to this stage, suicide, bullying, feelings of rejection, and feelings of basically not being worth more than a bargaining chip. By the time I got into college, all of these things had sort of manifested themselves in some way to the point where I didn't know what to do. I got to college, was on my own, was about 6 hours away from any family, and while I enjoyed what I was learning about, I didn't really enjoy having to do the work because I was lazy. But more important than that, I began really struggling with the fact that I hadn't had a girlfriend to that stage, or a relationship in any sort of way. I hadn't had somebody like me back to that stage. I was 18 years old at this point, so you would figure by this point somebody would have liked me. Sorry, I was 17 at the time. And because I ended up finding somebody before age 18 that led to other issues. I'm not going to get into those because it's not particularly helpful. But yeah, other things happened along those lines. And I was of the opinion that obviously I wasn't very attractive. I wasn't somebody that people would look at and be like, oh, I like this person, I want to date them. Now, part of the issue for that was I was never the outgoing type to want to ask people how they felt about me or to try and ask people out on dates. I had only really expressed my emotions to people twice. One time when I was very, very young, and the person probably forgot all about it. I did other means of showing them that I cared, but nothing like outright. And who knows about that situation. That was the story from My Life Story a little while back, if you remember it. If you haven't seen it, please go check it out. That can give you a bit more context. That series can give you a bit more context to all of this as well, that I might be forgetting or missing out on. But yeah, I'd never had a feeling of being wanted by somebody who wasn't part of family, and because I didn't trust my family because of all the shit that had happened, I just never had a feeling of being wanted or loved. That combined with the fact that I never had failed in my entire life, and I began failing while in college because I hadn't developed study methods that were smart, because I still had, if I'm being honest, a little bit of senioritis where I didn't want to do the work because I was like, what's the point in it? I'm going to do well regardless. What's the point in it? It's not like it's going to get me any further in life if I get an A in this class than if I get a C. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff started playing on my mind as well. And eventually the being unable to cry and express sadness towards all of these things caught up to me, and I broke. I became apathetic. I became unable to feel happiness. I became unable to feel anger. I became unable to feel any emotion except basically nothingness, which doesn't really encompass it because it's difficult to explain the feeling of feeling nothing. But basically, take the feeling that you have when you have a very bad heartache, missing somebody, or having just been rejected, propagate that throughout the entire day as the feeling that you feel, and then add on top of that, you can't feel sad about it, you can't feel happy about it, you can't feel angry about it, you have no emotions to feel about it. It's difficult to explain how that feels. That's the best I can. And that's where my life was in 2015 when I first went off to college. I had started the YouTube channel not long before then, and it had been a way in which I was able to express myself, and when I found comments on my videos, feel appreciated, feel cared about, feel liked. But because I had no ability to feel any emotion, it just sort of fell by the wayside. Since then, I've been trying to deal with the issues that came from that entire cycle, and the ways that I found that work are listening to music, especially music that makes me happy or makes me feel motivated or makes me feel joyful, or in some ways music that makes me think. So like there are some songs and concepts and ideas that I really like that are not too deep, depressing, and dark. So for example, Pink Floyd is not a band that I can listen to when I'm trying to get out of a funk. It's a band that I listen to when I'm in a funk and I want to be able to feel those feelings, because Pink Floyd talks about depression, talks about lunacy, talks about feelings of isolation. There are some songs that they do, for example, Fearless, for example. That's a good song from the album Meddle, Meddle. It's talking about people basically being fearless because of idiocy, or being fearless because they think they are better than other people, which is a deeper topic, sure, but it is a song that the way that it is written and it flows makes me happy. Cymbeline is another song from, I believe it's Obscured by Clouds is the name of the album that one's from. It's been a while since I've listened to some of these, but you know, so some of their music works, but I'm thinking more along the lines of I guess a good example is Zombie by Andres is a good song that makes me feel happy, makes me feel joyful. Fight Song is another song. I don't remember who it's by, but it's a popular pop song that people listen to. I don't know why that song makes me feel happy. It's supposed to be more of a ballad for feminine expression, from what I can tell, but it makes me feel joyful. Things like that are the things that I can listen to music-wise. But music is a good way. Taking walks and discussing these things with myself or with God, I guess is the best way to put it. There's a long story regarding me and religion and religiosity and spirituality that I would like to eventually get to. I'm not going to get into that this time around. We're already coming up on the 1 hour and 10 minute mark. And I would like to wrap this up soon because I've pretty much said all that I wanted to say. But I'll get to that another time. Might be another Mike-ochondriac sometime. Again, I don't want to talk too much about religion, but the experience of all of that is something that is very fascinating to me, and I don't think will cause too many arguments. Perhaps it will. I don't know yet. We'll get to that when, we get to that. Spending time with friends is another good coping mechanism. And if I'm spending time with friends, it has to be in even numbers, because if it's an odd number of people, if there's 3 people, one person is almost always left out. The exception is with Cameron, Jordan, and I. The 3 of us are able to fairly regularly keep me in a mindset where I don't feel like I'm the odd man left out. Perhaps Jordan would disagree, because he sometimes is the guy that Cameron and I pick on. Occasionally I'm the guy that they pick on. We've never really picked on Cameron. I don't know why. He just is able to take it better than all of us, and we just don't do it, I guess, because it's not as fun. I don't know. But in situations like that, it's not like I'm feeling left out. I'm feeling part of the conversation in every manner. It just is different. But in a lot of other situations with 3 or 5 or 7 or whatever people, I often find myself as the person without a talking partner. You know what I mean? So it has to be a specific situation where I can talk with people. I can feel heard. Even if it is by only one other person. My introvertedness allows me to have that happen. And I think probably the most helpful, the one that I haven't done a whole lot recently and probably should get back into, is meditation. Sitting calmly and comfortably in a position, just breathing and focusing on the breathing and just sort of relaxing with whatever ambient sounds are around me and trying to focus either on one particular thing. Oftentimes it's my breaths, sometimes it's just counting, other times it's a particular thought that is not obtrusive, and when I have obtrusive thoughts I don't beat myself up over them. That's another way that has helped me. The methods that I've used that don't work is watching YouTube. It basically distracts me long enough to where the problem goes away, but the problem never really truly goes away. So for example, if I have homework due and I don't want to deal with it, I watch YouTube, and when I get back to it, I'm like, oh shit, I have to do this homework, but then I watch more YouTube, and then eventually the homework comes due and I haven't done it. That kind of procrastination stuff doesn't work. YouTube in general is a very good method of distraction, but because I require a lot of distraction from my thought processes, because they always end up being so negative, well, not always, but very often end up being very negative, it's become a bit of an issue, so that doesn't help me out very much. And something that I want to mention as we're wrapping this up is, while I appreciate people watching and binging my videos, I would like people to try to stick to only a few here and there and get out and do something. Read a book, go take a walk, spend time with some family, that kind of stuff. Because I've noticed more often when I do that, when I do that between episodes of things, I feel more able to do the things after the fact than I need to do. So if I watch a YouTube video, decide to go for a walk, watch another YouTube video, and then come back, I'm more willing to want to do homework than I am if I watch the YouTube video, watch another YouTube video for the duration of the walk, and then continue doing that. And it might just be due to the fact that I split up the activities that were mentally draining, because the walk, quote unquote, is mentally draining. For me, it's not. It's more invigorating than anything. But you know what I mean. Like, if you have a project that you need to do, then you watch something between that and do the rest of the project later after that. Splitting it up like that makes it so that the project's more manageable. It's kind of like that. And also, when you aren't in a constant state of doing the same thing, stopping doing that same thing becomes easier. For example, if you're watching a TV series and you want to binge it, it's harder to stop watching it while binging it than just watching one episode at a time. Anyway, that's the method that has not helped me. Sleeping through my problems has not helped me. And hiding from my issues and problems that I have with other people or that I want to discuss with other people has also not been a good coping mechanism. Every time that I've discussed things with people has always helped enumerate various issues that I've had with that person, and then we're able to go through them, evaluate them, and more or less figure out what the issue is and solve it. It's not always easy. Talking about stuff like this, talking about depression, talking about mental health, talking about suicide, talking about various problems you have, the way the person acts, those are not easy conversations, but they are important conversations. Conversations that by having, you develop a stronger connection with that person. That has always been better than simply disregarding it and not facing up to the situation. Does that mean that I do that all the time and actually always address my issues? No. I'm very frequently not doing that when I should. But what I do know is that the coping mechanism of not talking about the problems, not addressing the problems, finding other distractions for the problems, those don't work for me. When I listen to music, for example, it's not solely to distract myself from the thoughts. It's to give myself time to then reevaluate them. And I do that while listening to the music, because the music allows me to stay in a mindset where I feel okay, where I feel fine. And I can think about those things more logically. When I go on walks, same situation, because I'm doing something else. You can't do that when watching YouTube videos, because you kind of got to watch the YouTube video to understand what's going on often. If you're watching, like, let's say a podcast or something, or you're listening to somebody reading off no sleep stories or something like that, sure, that could probably help some people. Doesn't help me, but it could help some people. But yeah, it's instead of finding a distraction to stop you from doing the thing, or instead of not doing the thing, find something that will get you in a mindset to do the thing and then do the thing. You know what I mean? I like to be able to give more helpful tips and tricks, but sadly, there aren't so many that I know. I haven't found a cure-all situation where I do this one thing and everything feels better. I haven't found a method of being able to overcome all of my difficulties in a certain period of time. There's some times when, even if I do the things that have worked, taking a walk, listening to music, reading, writing, anything of that nature, it doesn't help. And for people out there who have issues like that, I don't have anything just yet. Stay tuned. Maybe I'll find some things, because this is a topic that I want to do more work on, more research with, and eventually be able to be more of a help with. But until then, I'll continue talking about me, talking about the things that I go through on a daily basis, things that I've had in the past, if there's anything else that comes to mind. I basically told you my whole life story in this podcast this time around, missing out on a few little details here and there, not going fully in depth with some stories, as tends to happen with these types of things. But yeah, I'll try to continue doing this kind of stuff. You can watch my videos where I don't talk about this stuff and enjoy those for the content that they are, the entertainment value that they are. And hopefully that'll help some people out there who are going through rough times. Know that I do understand that people have a lot of issues out there, and I hear you. I wish that I could help all of you. You know, it fucking sucks the way that even though we have all of this communication nowadays, it's very difficult to still find the time and ability to communicate with everybody that needs it. But I like to do my best where I can. You know what I mean? Anyway, y'all listen to me ramble and rant for long enough. I hope that you got something out of this. I hope that I was able to explain why I've been gone, who I am as a person, in some aspects at least, and gave you something to listen to and ponder throughout this very interesting period of the world. My name is Michael Goldsmith, otherwise known as the Jackhammer 13, and I'm signing out. Catch you guys next time.